everyone, and welcome into Arlington Community Media. I'm Sean Stackhouse, and joining me today is another Sean, Representative Sean Garballey. How are you doing, Sean?
I'm well, Sean. How are you?
I'm doing well,
Thanks for having me here.
Yeah, I'm excited. Today we're going to be talking about where the legislative session is at, as well as the happenings in and around the State House. So to get us started, if there been any updates since the last time we talked with you happening at the State House?
Great. Well, Sean, I think the focus I have is my legislative priorities. And I have until July 31st to try to get a lot of those pieces of legislation through the process, through the House, Senate, and on Governor Baker's desk for hopefully a signature. And I'd say the biggest piece, the biggest issue that we're working on in the House of Representatives is criminal justice reform. The state Senate just passed a fairly comprehensive criminal justice reform package about a week ago, and the House's version is coming out. The Joint Committee on Judiciary is releasing our version today, as a matter of fact, this morning, and then we will be debating criminal justice reform next week. And what I'm expecting to be in the proposed package is a piece of legislation that I filed, actually two pieces of legislation that I filed for the past 5 years. One is on restorative justice, creating restorative justice across the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, which is a type of a diversion program that works to end the school to prison pipeline. And the other piece of legislation is an early medical release for those who are incapacitated or who are literally dying in our jails, to move them to a more appropriate facility. But if we're able to get restorative justice on the books, I really feel it's going to really be a game changer in terms of moving our state in the right direction when it comes to our criminal justice system.
Now, criminal justice is something that's been a big topic, as you had said, and it's been one in Arlington as well. And restorative justice has been a huge focus for you, as you had said. What has the process been like trying to push that bill forward? Has there been a lot of collaboration between different parties within the legislature?
Well, it's a great question, Sean. And my focus has been really to educate my fellow lawmakers, members of the House and the Senate, in terms of trying to get them to really understand what restorative justice is. Because if you just look at it, there's the perception that it may be weak on crime, or soft on crime, as some would say. But if you talk to police chiefs and police officers from across the Commonwealth who actually engage in the process of restorative justice, where they work to talk to the responsible party in a circle, where that responsible party and the victim are able to meet and have that dialogue, the responsible party certainly comes away with really understanding the impact that his or her offense had on the community as a whole and the individual. But the victim comes away with a real sense of being able to have been heard, and to understand why that crime happened, and with the belief and the strong understanding of that crime not repeating and not being afraid that it's going to happen again. And if you look at the recidivism rate, it is stronger, it is better with restorative justice versus the regular criminal justice process.
Now, last week, actually, James Milan of ACMi talked with Chief Ryan of the Arlington Police, where he had just gone to the White House and had talked about the opioid crisis. And he had also mentioned this restorative justice program. Mm-hmm. How would that work in a case with opiate abusers? Would this still be something that would be available to them, where it has become such a major issue in Massachusetts and in Arlington?
Right. Well, that would be my hope. The bill that I put forward is pretty specific in terms of the offenses where restorative justice cannot be used, and those are mostly violent offenses. And in cases where opiates are involved and they're not in a violent setting, and with the agreement of the local police department, like here in Arlington, I think that is a very worthwhile thing to do, and hopefully we can make it happen.
Now, one of the biggest arguments that people have for issues like this is the impact that it would have on prisons. Now, what would that impact be for this bill to be passed?
Well, the positive thing about restorative justice is that if a responsible party completes it successfully, right? So we're going to be doing a pre-arraignment in a lot of cases. They won't have a permanent record. Maybe they won't go to prison, serve 6 months or longer if it's not a violent offense. And the statistics show that most cases of individuals that go through restorative justice won't reoffend. So there's a strong likelihood that that individual won't end up in one of our prisons. And so it has a huge impact or potential impact on our budget. And I'm really hoping we can see that long term and then use a lot of those dollars in the area of mental health, in the area of substance abuse, in education, and public higher education. So I think it has a huge potential benefit. And that's one of the reasons I filed the bill, is around how much money we spend on our judicial system here in Massachusetts. We spend more money incarcerating our fellow nonviolent offender than we do on one of our 29 campuses of public higher education.
Now, in Massachusetts, if this does go forward and there is more money in the budget, have there been bills that you have been working on to try to write out what would be done with that money to try to improve some of the education systems in the state?
That's a great question as well. Not specifically tied with the money that would be saved doing restorative justice, because there really haven't been any studies on how much money could potentially be saved. But obviously, when restorative justice is passed, the implementation of restorative justice will be the important part, and that will really dictate, Sean, on the cost savings. But certainly, some of the bills I have filed, I just filed the bill that is known as the Finish Line Grant. And this is going to college. A lot of students, go to college and they have a hard time going from their second semester to their third semester, or their fifth semester to the sixth semester. And a lot of times they don't move on because they can't afford it. And many times they drop out. And so I've proposed a bill that would cover the full cost of tuition and fees for that semester to try to make sure students stay in school instead of dropping out and working or dealing with childcare or whatever the issue at home would be. And my hope is a cost savings through doing the restorative justice could be used for that.
Now, aside from criminal justice, which has been one of your main priorities, there have been others, and you've mentioned them as well: education and transportation. Could you give us an update on what's been happening in the legislature on those two topics?
Sure. I'll kind of gear it towards what I've been working on. Sean, the first piece, and because we have till July 31st to pass, all bills need to be passed by July 31. And so my focus has been on restorative justice, as we just talked about. Another focus I've really been targeting is a bill I have filed called the Non-Inclusive Concurrent Enrollment Program. And what this would do would allow students with disabilities, primarily with autism and Down syndrome, to be able to go to college, even if they don't pass the MCAS test. And as you know, that you need to pass the MCAS test in order to go to college. But one of the reasons I put forward this legislation is really about outcomes and about civil rights. I believe students who have Down syndrome and autism and other types of syndromes should, if they want, have the ability to go to college. And other states who have done similar programs have measured outcomes of students who have gone through college, and whether it's employment, self-sufficiency, these young people are better off than they would be if they didn't have the opportunity to go to college. So I feel very strongly about this piece of legislation, and I feel very good about this piece of legislation. I think we have a lot of legs in the legislature in terms of trying to pass it. We're just trying to educate our fellow lawmakers and collaborate. A lot of the work that I do in the legislature is really about building compromise and trying to go to Republicans and Democrats alike and educating them on the issues that I care about and the issues that I I have filed. So I think that would be a tremendous positive situation in the area of education, allowing these students to go to college because of the positive outcomes that would happen.
Now, you'd mentioned that a lot of this is having to be teaching related. Now, talking to the other legislatures, making sure that they are aware of the issue and trying to inform them to try to get this passed. How has the response been from your colleagues?
You know, and I don't want to be, ego-driven and say it's me teaching them. It's really just about having conversations. Because when you have a piece of legislation, you're not going to get everything you want. But you work with other people to try to shape it and to make sure it's in a positive direction. You're able to pass something that's going to have a positive impact on the lives of people in Arlington and Medford and other areas. The response I always get is always very positive. Even if a legislator may not agree with me, I'll give you an example. So I have a bill to make Massachusetts 100% renewable energy by 2050. One of the reasons I put forward this legislation is, one, with all of our universities and medical institutions and the great innovation happening in Massachusetts, we should be able to have a timeline for moving our Commonwealth towards 100% renewable energy. And especially because of the inaction at the federal level, and actually the action on the opposite side of President Trump withdrawing from the Paris Treaty, really states have to go it alone if we really want to tackle climate change. And even my colleagues who may be a Republican or maybe more moderate Democrats and may not support the concept of renewable energy, they appreciate having the dialogue. And I think that's really, really important, because you don't have to agree on everything to be able to sit down and work on an issue.
Now, to go back, we can talk about renewable energy after. To talk about education for students with disabilities and accessibility issues, what would the impact be on the colleges and universities that would be taking in these students if a program was made by the state to allow them to attend college?
Well, some colleges already do it. So UMass Boston is actually the center university and inclusions that has an actual academic center where a lot of these students go across the country. So UMass Boston is actually the model for this program, but Massachusetts is one of the few states that doesn't have it in our laws. And so a lot of the colleges, understanding that this bill may become law, have already worked with UMass Boston to set up best practices to make sure when students come into an inclusion setting that everybody learns together and it doesn't hurt a classroom setting. Certainly it's not going to be an appropriate place for all students, but for the students that want to do it, we shouldn't stop them from being able to.
That's great. Now, to go back to renewable energy, as you had talked about previously, you had hoped for a bill to have the state using entirely renewable energy by 2050. And you did mention that there was some opposition and there was, a dialogue that has to be had between Republicans and Democrats. Do you think that this is a bill that we could see being pushed forward in the legislature?
There is a lot of support for the bill. We have about 50 co-sponsors out of 200, and this is the first session I filed this legislation, so that is actually a pretty successful number. And so I'm doing what I can at the State House in terms of educating my fellow lawmakers. There is some skepticism in our ability to achieve 100% renewable energy because we're not Southern California, we're not Florida, we're not sunny throughout the year. But my belief is that because of all the innovation in Massachusetts is that we should have a timeline of trying to tap into that innovation and moving towards 100% renewable energy. We may not get there, but we can get as close as possible. Because right now in Washington, there is no timeline. They're actually taking us backwards. And we see recent weather patterns, whether it be the flooding in the southern part of our country that has caused hundreds and hundreds of millions of people to be displaced. If you look at the forest fires in the western part of the country, we're talking weather patterns that have been unbelievably, in terms of statistics, had such a negative impact. It's not just a cyclical thing, as some folks say, you know, with weather patterns come and go. These are having a tremendous negative impact in historical ways than never before. So I truly believe that Massachusetts needs to set the standards in terms of moving towards 100% renewable energy. And I honestly think we can get there. I don't think we're going to get there this session because it takes dialogue and it takes, there's 160 members of the House, so you need to count to 81 votes to be able to pass a piece of legislation. But I think we're going to get there.
And hopefully we can see some sort of dialogue come up with this in the near future. And one of the biggest issues that people have with renewable energy is the cost that it would take to begin that process, where if you wanted to have the state at 100% renewable energy by 2050, we wouldn't really be seeing the results from that for a long time. It would set us up in the future, but for the time being, that would be a major cost expense. How does that play in with some of your other bills that you have regarding education as well as criminal justice?
Sure. Well, the 100% renewable energy wouldn't be implemented until 2050. So we would set up standards and protocols ready to switch to 100% renewable energy, but when 2050 comes. So there is obviously concern of cost. So lawmakers have a concern with the cost of being able to do this, the cost it would have to the state, and certainly the influence that utility companies have on Beacon Hill. Obviously, they have a stake in the game because they make a lot of money in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. So transitioning to 100% renewable energy would certainly impact their profit margins. And so a lot of them have influence on Beacon Hill, so that's what I am tackling with right now. But certainly, whether it be criminal justice reform or higher education, or certainly working for our environment, these are issues that people in Arlington care about, and that is one of the reasons why I care about it as well. Now,
since we've been talking today, budget, it seems like, has really been one of the main talking points, that everything revolves around this. And the Boston Herald actually had a report earlier this week where they were talking about that there are $558 million worth of unused sick days by government employees that have been backlogged for years and years and haven't been used, and really could hurt taxpayers very soon. Could you tell us a little bit about this issue, as well as processes of reform?
Right. So it is an important issue. Anytime you have an issue that has an impact on taxpayers, it needs to be discussed, whether it's sick days, pensions, on the T, or you name it. A lot of these sick days have been collectively bargained by workers and their employers, in this case, the state. So it's important that the governor reach out to these unions and vice versa, and really have a dialogue in terms of future collective bargaining cases, in terms of what's happening with these sick days. And if there is a legitimate concern in terms of the budget impact that these sick days could potentially have in the future, when contract negotiations come up, make sure that taxpayers aren't on the hook for these sick days, but also make sure that the employee is not going to be negatively impacted if there is a serious health matter that comes up in his or her family. Wouldn't be negatively impacted if the state decided to restructure sick days. And I think we can get there. I think it's important, but I think it is important for the governor, who is obviously the executive of the Commonwealth, to sit down with these unions, who are very good people and willing to come to the table, as we saw in the Carmen's union with the MBTA, and they just want to come to the table with the governor and make sure that taxpayers do get treated fairly, but also the workers who give everything to the Commonwealth don't get left behind as well.
Now, another report that came out by Boston 25 News was about Mass legislatures that had been saying that they had been commuting as well, and they actually did not show up at the State House in the hours that they had logged, and you had been one of the representatives that were listed there. I'd like to just give you an opportunity to respond to that.
Well, no, I appreciate that, Sean. I think that's an important thing to respond to. You know, because I'm so close to Boston, I commute to the State House almost every single day, even sometimes on weekends. There are state representatives and state senators who have district offices because they live in the western part of the state or on Cape Cod. So they don't come into the State House nearly as much, but because I live about 15 minutes outside of Boston, I have the ability to commute back and forth from Arlington, sometimes 2 or 3 times a day. So I'm not sure how long Fox 25 News was outside my office. I don't think they were there very long because they would have seen me if they were. But one of the greatest honors I have in my life is serving the people of Arlington and Medford and being a full-time representative. And because of that, I literally am in the State House almost every single day, even on weekends, because like I said, I don't have a district office, so I'm able to use the State House as a district office. I know the issue of per diems is one without accountability because the taxpayer is not able to directly monitor representatives or senators. So the current system or the past system before 2016 had them really just kind of take the legislators at their word. And I think that's unfair. And I thought that was unfair. So that's one of the reasons I voted this past session last year to end per diems. And I think that was an important reform. And even after that, I'm still going into the State House every single day. I was in the State House on Saturday for most of the day working on restorative justice. We weren't in session, but like I said, I'm able to use my State House office as a district office. And one thing I would just say to you, Sean, and to the viewers, if anybody in the town of Arlington or the city of Medford wants to meet with me, I'm literally in the State House every single day. So I would encourage you to call me. You can call me on my cell phone, 781-859-7781, or my office, 617-722-2090, and just come into the office and see me, or just come in from Arlington or Boston, take the train to Park Street, walk up to the State House. I'm always in my office, and it's because of how close I am, giving me the ability to do that.
Well, I appreciate you being so open with us about that.
Well, thank you, Sean. I appreciate the question.
Now, another person that represents Arlington is State Senator Cindy Friedman. I'd like to talk a little bit about the relationship that you have with her now that she is the acting state senator. Mm-hmm. Have you been collaborating with her on issues specifically regarding Arlington?
Yeah, we work very closely together. We worked closely together when she was the chief of staff to our former senator, Ken Donnelly, who we so sadly lost last year. We work closely. She is very passionate about criminal justice reform as well, specifically in the area of pretrial bail reform. And so I'm working with her to make sure that that bill gets in the overall package of criminal justice reform. We also work very closely together on the Mugar issue in East Arlington, trying to prevent the development on the wetlands. Also in the area of trying to rebuild Arlington High School and other areas, and of course bringing back as much local aid money and Chapter 90 money for our roads and bridges as possible. It's such, what makes the legislative role so critical is being able to work with your colleagues, whether they be in the House or the Senate. And in the House, I chair 2 caucuses, the MBTA caucus and the Public Higher Ed caucus. And one of those roles is having to collaborate and actually bring together a vast majority of the legislature. And so I think that's a skill that I have. And so I've been able to work with her closely, as well as Rep. Rogers, who represents parts of Arlington, all of Belmont, and parts of Cambridge as well, to try to benefit the people of Arlington.
Now, where you have been working close, are there any specific bills that are going to be coming up in this legislative session that we should be looking out for, specifically for Arlington residents?
Well, certainly, the issue of health care is something that has been critically important. I've been working with the legislature. I put forward a piece of legislation known as the CHIP bill, which is the Children's Health Insurance Program, which funds health insurance for children across the Commonwealth and in this district. The Republicans in Washington have threatened to cut CHIP, unfortunately. And so if they do that, you would have a lot of children, even in this district and across the state, lose their health insurance. My legislation would mandate that Massachusetts cover the cost of health insurance. And I'm sure, Sean, your question will be, well, how would you afford it? Well, it is a tough question, but it's an important priority, because if you have 100,000 kids without health insurance, it's actually going to increase cost to taxpayers because those children will end up in the emergency room. So we're going to pay for it either on the short term now or at a higher cost later. And of course, working with Cindy and Dave is a piece of legislation I filed around multiple sclerosis and protein disorders and covering those. And those were two based here for families in Arlington. But also in terms of budget issues for Arlington, our focus for the budget this year is obviously always trying to increase Chapter 90 money for our roads and our bridges, increasing our local aid from UGA, Unrestricted General Government Aid, Sean, in Chapter 70, which goes directly to education, but specifically in that, a piece that is so important to Arlington is the special education circuit breaker, where the state has really walked back its priority and its commitment to funding the special education circuit breaker, which is a reimbursement to the town of Arlington, which really funds the needs of our out-of-district costs in special education. If you talk to our town manager, Adam Chapdelaine, or Kathleen Bodie, our superintendent of schools, the issue of the circuit breaker not being funded by the state is one of the biggest issues. So last year, a commission known as the Foundation Budget Review Commission released its recommendations saying that the state was actually not meeting its commitment to funding cities and towns' education levels. One of those areas is in the area of the special education circuit breaker. I put forth the proposal, and I'm going to work with Cindy Friedman in the Senate and Dave Rogers to increase our commitment to the special education circuit breaker, which would certainly impact the town of Arlington specifically. And of course, trying to meet our commitment of rebuilding Arlington High is another huge commitment.
Now, what would be the timetable for something like this? Would we be seeing more money going into the programs for special education at Arlington High School and Ottoson Middle School, some of these other elementary schools as well? When would we be able to see something like that happen?
So the governor releases his budget around January or February, and then the House debates our budget in the third week in April, or the week after school vacation, and the Senate does theirs in May. And so my proposal would be realized, hopefully, when we debate the budget in April. So hopefully by June, July, the schools would see some of that monetary resource.
All right, well, that is all the time that we have for this sit down with you today, Sean. I thank you so much for being so open with us and really filling in the Arlington residents on all the happenings at the State House.
Great, thank you, Sean. Thank you very much.
Again, my name is Sean Stackhouse for Arlington Community Media. We'll see you next time.